Now, I asked Stephen and Jesse both to pick a couple of dreams that would be worthwhile to share in a podcast like this. I did the same thing as well. Mr. Stephen, I invite you.
But all right, January 5th of 2007. I went to bed as usual and had a dream that was quite vivid to me, and I felt like I should write it down, so I got up and wrote as many details as I could remember. This is all one dream in parts. Here it is in as close an order of events as I can remember. I dreamt that I was watching the news and a slender older man, perhaps in his mid-60s with gray hair and a really hairy neck, who identified himself as a former sheriff and was some sort of spokesman for an organization, was speaking of the various public service jobs, namely of the fire and police departments and their foul language, bad performance, and corruption. This man was contending that the reason that we had these problems is because we don't pay them enough, and that if we raise their salaries, we would get higher quality employees. I remember standing with a member of the press in a secluded place by a concrete building that was poorly lit. He seemed quite agitated to be meeting with me. I asked, "Why don't you report on all this corruption?" He responded, "Hey, we report on all we can without getting ourselves into trouble." I sensed that what this meant is that if they reported the whole truth, the Gadiantons in the police would come for them. Interesting. I dreamt that there was way too much schoolwork for small children. I saw a small child at a desk with a pile of paperwork and a brow furrowed with stress. I dreamt I was in a large store like a Costco. There were lines as far as I could see. I was standing in line. I had the impression that there had been an earthquake that had been a fairly bad one, just enough to get people a little concerned to get them shopping for some supplies. I got the impression that the earthquake wasn't enough to disrupt people's routines because I looked up at a TV while I stood in line that had a feed to television shows, and there was some popular reality dance show or something on. Then a woman who was at the cash register yelled out to the crowd that the machine is down and that anyone who was using credit, it seemed to me that she mentioned a name of the credit, but it was unfamiliar to me, and I don't remember what she called it. But these people would not be able to buy anything today. People in line got worried and upset and stood for a moment in disbelief. I remember people pulling out their wallets to see if they had cash and purchasing the most important things in their carts that they had cash for. Then there was another earthquake that was more severe than the first. Everything shook violently, and people in the warehouse tried to find a place where nothing would fall on them. Debris and beams fell on the people below. I dreamt next of a couple of LDS missionaries going into an AM/PM mini-mart and being violently refused service and kicked out forcibly. I got the impression that this rude behavior was widespread. I commented in my dream, "I didn't think people today would act like that because they're too afraid of getting sued." I seemed to understand after the question that it was just accepted by the populace as acceptable. I didn't really see why people were so mad, just that something had happened to change public opinion of the church. I dreamt that I was kind of floating overhead and I saw a multitude of people moving in a crowd in what looked like an old factory scene. I saw a friend of mine in the crowd walking along, and the interpretation came to me that these are all people who had to find other jobs because I did the wrong word there, wrong there. Theirs are no longer available, or perhaps obsolete. My friend works in the tech field. I dreamt that there was a shortage of food and that people who had pets were starting to question if they should keep feeding their animals. I saw a woman looking at some feed she was going to feed her animal and having a moment where she stared at the feed, wondering if she should be saving it for herself and yet feeling awful because she loved her animal, meaning that she was going to save it for herself to eat.
She was going to eat the animal food.
She was going to eat she was like, "I don't know if I should be feeding this. I love my animal, but I should save it
for my horses or just for me."
Yeah. I then stood in my friend's kitchen, the one who was walking in the crowd, who, by the way, is into preparedness and has stored food. And he had 2 loaves of bread. One loaf looked good on the outside, but inside was green and poison. He told me that it was a bad loaf and he wouldn't recommend it. He then pointed to the other loaf and offered me some. I took a bite, and it was out of this world delicious. He told me that it was a special bread that only his wife makes.
You know what's interesting about that is I had a dream not long ago, and in this dream, people were starving, and somebody had bread cultures, like little starters in a jar, but they were red, and they were discolored, and they were trying to make bread, but the bread was poisonous that they were making. It wasn't the right bread. It wasn't the delicious bread, that the bread of life, you know?
Wow.
So
Interesting.
that's interesting to me.
Yeah, totally cool. And I saw things in your dream that I'm like, oh, I've seen that too. I've seen, not all of it, but yeah, parts of it.
Stephen, did I cut this off at the right place? Was that the end of the dream?
That was the end of it. So that one just kind of danced from place to place, and I think most of it is
like different vignettes.
Yeah, little and some of that stuff, I mean, it isn't, I think, revelatory in like a sense where you're like, whoa, that's, I don't know, like, I mean, the child with his brow furrowed with stress, I think that's been an increasing issue in the United States and probably around the world, that there's lots of kids that are overwhelmed with schoolwork, but that's, to me, that puts it more in a time frame, for some of these events to take place. But
yeah, because I know some dreams that I've had, I'll recognize that I'm just I'm an invisible observer inside a certain location at a certain time, but I realize I don't interact. Similar for those who have seen the show Quantum Leap, there's a character who helps interact. And
Jesse, classic American show, Jesse.
But in other words, I've had times where I recognize I'm simply an invisible observer who doesn't interact. I'm just walking around in the midst of what I'm seeing.
Well, that's some of the things I just picked out of that then was like in my dream, you heard me say I was an observer in the first part, I was active in the second part, and I was an observer in the third part. And I had vignettes, the same as Stephen was saying just then, a lot of clarity and a lot of detail. Themes are very similar as well. Like there's a commonality to like a language that the Lord speaks, even though it's translated into our own version of that language, but there's a definite commonality.
Stephen, I invite you to do the second part.
Okay, number 2. I did a more recent one, September 2021. Dream I had this morning. An old, arrogant, and rather tame lion was walking through a jungle. His frame was bony, and he lacked the strength he had when he was young. He came to a group of animals resting together, a lion, a leopard, a rhino, and more of the dangerous animals of the world. The lion felt, and it's like I knew how he felt. The lion felt, I am the king, and they all know it. So he had no fear as he approached. He stopped to basically check in with his subjects. Before he could say anything, the animals all arose and formed together in a blur of commotion into one force that rushed the lion. It was as if they were no longer many animals, but one giant creature that would destroy the lion. The lion stood fearless, as if their advance could not hurt him, believing past glories and victories meant he could not lose. The giant creature turned into an enormous, squarish, tan tank. So it's like it was this giant animal, and then it became
like a metal piece of weaponry.
Exactly. And the figure of the lion became an elderly military veteran, a United States veteran, sitting in a wheelchair with his head bowed in weakness and defeat. The tank flew through the air with so much speed and came down, crushing the veteran, and I awoke. So that's one that I did pray about, and I didn't write down my interpretation like Jesse did, but the lion represents the United States and the glories that we have, we rest upon. We think we are strong. We are not strong. We are weak because of our lack of morality. We are weak because we don't follow God. And these other animals represent the many alliances that will take place that Isaiah speaks about, even. That we can expect that there will be alliances that will invade our country and destroy us. Like Isaiah talks about.
The interesting thing with that one is, like, I get imagery of Daniel with the leopard's feet and all of that, but I don't know if Jacob remembers, but I sent him a dream just recently, and in this dream I was in America, and I was walking around near the beach in America, Southern California somewhere, and I was picking up all these crystals out of the ground. They're just amazing crystals, like on the matrix and shapes and sizes. And these crystals represented truth and freedom and all these things, and they were being trampled underground by the Americans. And in this dream, that's what the same thing is exactly what you just said, that they'd lost morality and they'd lost truth. And in the next part of the dream, I was with the President Biden, I guess he was. I mean, I don't really care about the politics of America that much, but and he was refusing to let go of power. And it was very much this theme of this elderly dying gentleman and the loss of morality and the great truth, and then the invasion that was coming because of that. Same thing.
What sticks out to me in your dream, Mr. Nix, is that there was no respect for this elderly lion. For me, I love to watch combat sports, boxing, and mixed martial arts. And there's plenty of times when an up-and-coming fighter will be fighting a fighter obviously towards his end of his career, probably a former champion with a highlight reel stuff of nightmares. And almost always you'll see this younger fighter have a level of discipline and respect as he engages the more experienced fighter who doesn't have the same kind of prowess in his youth. What I got from your dream is that lion figured, they all know I'm in charge. They know the kind of beatings down. They realize my claws, my leap, my roar. And when it came down to it, it's like, oh, we got no respect for you. Bam! All of us together. You got nothing, homie.
Undefeated in 2 world wars, and now look at you.